It's our pleasure this morning to have as our visitors Ralph and Ray Kepley, sons of Austin Kepley, grandsons of David Kepley, who came to Grant County and brought his family here in 1887. Is that right?
88.
88, okay. And there's an old story that's been repeated over and over that you came by ox team, and it's been corrected over and over, and we might make that correction here one more time. The family came to Grant County on a train, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Not all the way to Grant County because there wasn't a train in Grant County.
No, they got off at Hartman,
Right.
and some of their relatives met them there, and they came on down to where the place was.
Okay, they settled it. And close to Golden?
Yes.
The town of Golden? There wasn't anything left of the town of Golden by the time you came along, was there?
No, only
The school
scraps
house.
and nails and pieces of rock.
Okay. Why don't you tell us what you first remember about Grant County, or what your life really, what's your earliest memory?
I don't know just why I remember this, but I was, I suppose, 5 years old, 4 years old, and Ray and I got a little red wagon for Christmas, and Ray got the idea, he was always pretty adventurous anyway, that he wanted to take it to our grandfather's place and show him the little red wagon. And I wasn't in favor of that, but he started out, and I didn't think he was going to go, but he got out 200 or 300 yards from the place, and I got frightened. I thought he was going to get lost. He was going the wrong direction. So I took out after him, and I chased him, caught up with him, but he was stubborn as usual, and he didn't want to come back. And I remember I finally convinced him to come back, and, but I was really frightened. I thought he was going out there and get lost and never seen him again.
How could he get lost on the flat prairie?
Well, there was a few soapweeds out there.
Oh.
I'd never been out that far, I guess, by myself. And I was scarier than he was.
Do you have a first recollection you'd like to share, Ray?
Well, they talked about the hard winter of 1911 and 12, but I have no memories of that. But about that same time, about 1.25 miles from us, we had a new cousin that was born. And I remember our mother got us a horseback. She was side saddle, and she had the youngest one in the family, Ernest, with her, and Ralph and I was on an old work horse behind. A regular saddle, one riding tandem, one ahead of the other, and that's must have been along 1912 or so. I'd have to ask Ramsey her age in order to find out for sure, but that's one of my earliest memories.
Okay, tell us about your school days.
Well, you want to take a shot at that?
Well, I started school in 1913, and school was about 2 miles from home. And I can remember folks going over to a man by the name of Hubbard, who was on the school board, and talking to him about when the school was going to start, finding out whether they had a teacher or not. Didn't always have teachers in those days. And I can remember going over there, and I was pretty excited about going to school. And I went to school there all through grade school. And went to high school, started there in 1920, 21. Well, it was fall of 20, yes. And the school was in the old courthouse upstairs, what they call the courtroom. It was the biggest part of the upstairs. There was a stage, 2 rooms that were made for jury rooms. And those were the extra rooms that we had. But there was 35 pupils in school that year. That is the biggest school they'd had. And it had 2 teachers, a man and his wife. Their name was MacArthur. And they had a son of my age, but he was a year ahead of me in class. He was quite a bit smarter. There's no doubt about that. And knew his way around quite a bit. Pretty nice boy. And school was quite a bit different then, of course. We had these 2 teachers, and they taught everything between them. We had, of course, English and algebra, ancient history, and I suppose the science. We had 4 subjects, I know, every year. And there was no room for extra activities much, but we had always had a school play, usually 2 or 3 of them during the year. We had the girls played basketball and the boys played basketball, both outdoor courts, and they were side by side. Sometimes when the girls were practicing, it kind of bothered us boys. They clothes they wore then was long bloomers. And nowadays it was would be scandalous the way they dressed, and it was then for different reasons. But I don't remember that the girls ever had a game while we were the 3 years we were in the courthouse. But the boys would have 5, 6, 7 games a year. They
Were you on the team?
well, when I was junior, I was on the team. Kind of, I practiced with them. I played one game. We played against Lincoln. We lost that game 63-12. I always remember that. It was the only time we really played in a game. I'd never seen a basketball, indoor basketball court before. I thought that was the most wonderful thing that ever would be. I had to go home every Friday night, and they just usually played on Friday night. So I practiced with the team all week, but I never played in any more games. I did go to one other game down in Moscow, and I didn't play in that. They just started 5 men and they finished the game. The only game they won that year. Won it by 1 point, I remember. But I had a good time. I thought that was wonderful.
Okay, Ray, what are your school experiences?
Well, on that subject, I might make an addition. Apparently, his 2nd or 3rd year, why they imparted a English and French teacher, because Ralph would come home on weekends and he'd bring a little French on us, parlez-vous français. And I remember that. That was this gal from Lincoln, I can't remember her name. Her father built Lake McKinney.
Hodge.
What was the name?
Hodge. He was an engineer for the Santa Fe Railroad.
Don't seem like it was Miss Hodge, but maybe that's right.
Yes, she taught during the sophomore year, the first year, the wife of the principal taught French. That was the hardest subject I had in school. I just wasn't a foreign language.
Word French, huh?
I learned to read it. I read several books in French, but I had enough trouble spelling English words. I never could learn to spell French words right or pronounce them. I couldn't pronounce and talk. I could understand the other kids talking in French if they didn't talk too fast. There was only about 4 girls that they learned the language and talked it. I suppose they had a terrible accent, but they could understand each other and the teacher. But the 2 teachers, well, I'm sorry, I said Miss Hodge was the teacher. It wasn't. It was Evans, principal's wife, second year. And she was French herself. And she pronounced the words altogether different. Like that is quite a few of them. Like for Mr. One of them pronounced Bessire and the other Monsieur. And so we kind of had to start over the second year to learn a lot of words that way. But I enjoyed French. I understood English a lot better after I studied French, and I'd have liked to remember it. What's my things in French? And I could for a long time read it, but it just graduated.
There's not much call for it out in this part.
No, I didn't. About the most useful language you could have learned, I know.
Okay.
I know it was interesting to me because we read so much in the popular novels then, they always had to use a little French in it. That was the going thing then. And I always read that with an English pronunciation. When Ralph came home, it was probably du Francais, right?
Correct.
That was something new. I lost interest in it, if that's the way the frogs talk.
Okay, you had, you were telling me earlier about a story about the way you got to school in the winter of 1918. Tell us about the blizzard and the storm.
The winter of 1918 and 19, generally, I think most of the people who date back to that time credit December the 17th as when it started. We'd had a good little snow at Thanksgiving time, I remember that. And it had melted off. It was well off. We got the big snow at the 17th of December. And it would continue every few days and snow again. And many people probably say we had 3 feet of snow, and I imagine we did over that. But I would guess there was at least 30 inches on the ground at one time. And that really created problems, especially school. We had been in the habit of going to school in a buggy, one-horse shay. But we had to change to a 2-horse sled. In fact, for weeks at a time, we didn't even have school. Isn't that right?
I don't think we had any schools in January at all, and none in the last week or 2 of December.
And we wound up going to school in this sled and picked up the neighbor kids down at Granddad Kepley's, our cousin, and took those with us. And that continued until well into February, and I think the snow finally went off probably the early part of March completely. And the country was just a regular swamp then.
Was that the winter that you had trouble with the rabbits eating the horse
Well,
food? Or?
The rabbits there were more rabbits, especially jackrabbits, cottontails too. And they eat everything they could get a hold of. I know Granddad Kepley had to go out in the orchard, a lot of trees and plum bushes and currant bushes. And they swarmed into there around those plum bushes by the hundreds, probably the thousands. And they just about cleaned those off to the ground. And we ate jackrabbits that winter quite a bit. Us kids, we had our dogs, and it was easy to catch jackrabbits. Any dog could catch them when the snow was only about 2 feet deep. The rabbits would sink in, and we would take the rabbits and dress them and hang them up in the tree and let them freeze and eat them at our convenience. But later on, while the snow would melt and form a crust, and sometimes a horse could even stay on top of it. And when it got like that, the dogs didn't have a chance with the rabbits. I remember that we wore 4 buckle overshoes so long that winter that when the spring came, we took our overshoes off, we could run like deer. We'd light-footed.
Shed a lot of
Good
weight.
training.
Yeah.
At school, in order to get about 5 months, I think the teacher was paid for about 5 months that year. And school was continued about a month late, which didn't make me happy. It continued well into May, and ordinarily it was out in April.
Okay.
Usually only had 5 or 7 months of school.
Yeah, 7 months school.
And, well, that was true until in the 40s. I don't remember just when. I think probably you went to 7 months school. I think so.
I don't really know. I might have the first
I'm pretty sure you did.
few years. I don't remember.
I think so. I think country schools changed over sometime in the 40s. I wouldn't be sure about that. I think that's right.
Do you remember what your first paying job was and how come you had it?
Yeah. I worked for the county road department one winter. I don't know just how I got the job. The man that been doing it quit for some reason or other. I think that was my cousin had been running the tractor, and he moved to Colorado, Johnny Reynolds. And I don't know whether he recommended me or just how, but it was in 1927, and we'd just finished up harvesting over a crop, and we had quite a bit, some mild ones, I don't remember my lot. But we'd finished it, and they asked me if I wanted the job, and I took it, run a Caterpillar tractor all winter till, I think it's April or so.
And start farming again.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I think you had an earlier one than that, right? You tell us about your very first.
Yeah, I think probably Ralph's first job, and I know it was my first. We worked when they raised the old brick school building over at the old town of Ulysses. Our uncles bought that, and eventually it was torn down, and the brick was used to build the Kepley Brothers garage, which is now occupied by Weber Supply. Our job then wasn't a very big job. It was to pull the old-fashioned square-cut nails out of the woodwork. And for that we were paid 5 cents a pound. Doesn't sound like very much, but actually a kid could have made several dollars a day. Ralph stuck to his job pretty good, but there was too much excitement for me, and I don't think I made much more than those spending money. But anyway, it was an experience And I remember some of the other boys worked on it. Gerald McGilvery worked at that job, and some of the older boys was Ernest Adair and Ray Miller. They were quite a bit older, and I think they had a little more added jobs to.
More income
Yeah.
than 5 cents a pound.
But I remember the first day over there, or rather that evening, our uncles, Frank and Skinny, we call them, Frank and Clarence, they took us to town, the new town, to the restaurant. It was rather late, it's after dark, and they come up a terrible thunderstorm. To be away from home, it bothered me about as much as anything I've ever been in. And lightning struck Charlie Benny's house, which is over about where Weaver's popcorn is now. And the men folks all run out to go down there to see whether they could help. It turned out there wasn't any too much damage done. It rained so hard and put the fire out. But then Uncle Frank and Skinny came back, and we got in the old Oakland car, started home. And we got down south to where the bridge is now. Well, at that time there wasn't any bridge across the North Fork. There was just a little wooden culvert, about 4 feet square. The North Fork was a running stream at that time, and from springs up above, and it trickled across under that culvert. But this storm had raised the creek, and they had run up over the culvert on top of it. Well, of course, they stopped the car. Uncle Frank got out, pulled his shoes off, and rolled his breeches up. And dark as pitch, but they had the lights on. Walked out there to see whether it's deep enough or too deep to cross. Left Ralph and I in the car, and that thunder was crashing, and the lightning was flashing, and we got kind of scared before they come back. But they were kind of adventurous, and they got back and started walking up and crossed it all right. We pulled mud all the way home. And that was the end of that day's adventure.
Yeah. Okay. What did you do for entertainment while you were, from 10 on through your teens?
I think it was a little unusual. Maybe I never knew anybody else quite that, played quite that way. But I don't know how we got started. But we went around over the prairie, picked up old bones. There's lots of cattle and horse skeletons around. And the different bones we called different animals. Mostly cattle. We usually used the ankle bones and the small bones and the foot and thing. And we'd take a string we got off the grocery sacks. They always tied up the grocery sacks. String that they had hanging up on the wall there and pull it down. And we'd take that string and make fences out of it. All we had fences around the whole yard.
Those were play claims.
Yeah, we called them the play claims. But of course, those ranches, sometimes we called them ranches. And horses, why, we take a block of wood and drive nails in them, legs and for the neck and head and things like that, and tie a string on the tail. And there were horses. Well, there's a few people around who could carve horses out of wood, like Ralph McGilvery. I know he gave us a few of those that carved. They look like real horses, but he still does the same thing. He does it a little better than that. They was wonderful to us. We played with those for years and years. Not all of them we did play with, I guess, when we was 7 or 8, 10 years old, we played. We played marbles sometimes. That's about all I remember us playing.
The thing after was, I was playing players. They were kids, our cousin would get together, we trade horses, trade cattle, you know. That was quite a thing too.
Okay, I think I've read somewhere or heard somewhere that the Kepley family was, grew a lot of broomcorn. Tell us about broomcorn raising.
You want to start on that, Ralph?
Well, that was mostly before my time, and I'd have to depend more on what I heard than what I really.
They did. We did help. a little
Yes,
bit.
I think 1 year or two we helped some, but not enough that we really knew what we were doing. But I was around enough to know how broomcorn was raised and how much work there was to it. It was a lot of manpower required for it. It was the first cash crop, I suppose you would say, that was raised in this county to any extent. And of course, broomcorn grew up 6 or 8 feet tall a good year. And they had to cut it at the time that it was just mature enough that it hadn't started to, the bush hadn't started to bend over, because that ruined it. It wrangled out and moved, turned its head down. So they had to get everybody that they could find to cut the broomcorn when it was ripe. Well, it really wasn't ripe, they call it ripe, but it was still in the breed stage. Then they would cut it off. Oh, the stem about that long down behind, below the brush, and lay it across the arm until they got a bundle as large as they could carry, and then they laid it down beside the road real carefully. They left it there till several days till it dried out. Sometimes they'd come back through there and spread the bundle out and put them back together, you know, to kind of dry them out, especially if the ground was kind of wet. And when it was right, while they would pick that up, they had long wagons with a long box about 50 or 20 feet long and about 4 feet wide. And they'd lay that broomcorn in there with the grain end to the center and the stems out. They'd haul that in and they'd put it in a rick, the same way, about 4 feet wide, I suppose. It might be as much as 4 or 5 feet high, maybe 20, 40 feet long, according to how much broomcorn they had. And they let it stay there. Even after they got it in that rick, it would dry out because those butts were sticking outside, and the wind would go through there and get in there and it'd dry out. All in the winter time, they'd do what they call seeding it. They'd strip that, had a machine and they run it through, and they had a big belt, and they'd just slide that up there. It had to be very particular. You had to be careful not to get your hand in there.
Similar to a thrashing machine, a little on that order.
Yeah,
but it was fed altogether different.
Yeah, the growers pulled it through and stripped the seed off. Well, that seed was absolutely worthless. I don't think the birds would even eat it.
No.
It would just lay out there in piles. There was a lot of it. Nothing. It was hard and evidently didn't have much nourishment in it.
The only thing it was good for was to seed next year's crop.
Yeah.
There was, I might add too, there was 2 methods of harvesting that, cutting or hand topping and pulling it. Well, now, I don't remember ever seeing any pulled, but some of the so-called experts were really better at that. And I couldn't describe exactly how that was done, but
Well, that was what they call dwarf broomcorn that they pulled.
yeah,
It didn't grow up only about 4 or 5 feet high. And at a certain stage, that stem was real tender, and they could just jerk it up out of there. You needed someone pretty strong to do it, but they could just go along and just jerk it. stem, how to break it, you know.
There are generally roughly two different types of broom cord. The standard, they call it, which grew tall, like Ralph said, 6 to 8 feet tall, and then the dwarf. As I remember, the dwarf finally got more popular,
Yeah.
because the standard, it would lodge and go down the highway or anything like that.
Okay, well, there was a time that I've read about when your uncles were called the broomcorn kings of Southwest Kansas.
Yeah, I think they got that name, but Granddad built a big shed to put the broomcorn in after they baled it. And the reason he did that was the price of it was changeable. One year it might be worth $15 a ton, the next year $150, or maybe 2 or 3 years down the road. It's just how scarce it was, what the supply and demand was for it. And there's only so much broomcorn raised, and there's a little bit of shortage, well, they bid up very high on it. So he built that, and then I think they had 3 years crop in that, and they got a chance to sell it, and they hauled it to Liberal. They sold it out with the contract that they would haul it down there, deliver it. So they got all their neighbors, and I don't know, I think they had 10 or 15 wagons this one time, if I remember right. And I think then they had to make 2 or 3 trips to get it all down there. They couldn't haul too much. About 4, 5, 6 bales on the load, I believe. Maybe sometimes on they had a bigger wagon. And they, when they hauled it into Liberal this one time, when they had most wagons, a lot of paper would come out and took pictures of them. And they called him my granddad the Broomcorn King. It was all sold in his name at that time. Whether it was or not, I don't know.
This is kind of dry work, talking this much. I think we'll break right here and have a coffee, and then we'll finish, okay? All right, we're back, and at the request of our photographer, Sharon Jones, who is a newcomer to Grant County, Ralph is going to tell us about the rabbit drives that took place here in the 30s.
I don't know just what year it was. I believe about 33 or 34, I believe. All the rabbits were thick. And that fall, not much of the wheat came up. And lots of places where it did come up, the rabbits ate it all, just eat it off the ground and it died. So all the farmers were worried about what they were going to do about the rabbits. Of course, they'd had rabbit drives before, but I don't know if any in this county. But they organized rabbit drives. I think I went to 2. That's all I remember going to. I might have been another 2. But they didn't appeal to me too much. I thought they'd be interesting and be a good way to get rid of the rabbits. So they get rid of the rabbits all right, but they were dangers. It's hard to understand how berserk some people go when they get excited. They just swing those clubs, which were usually old ball bats or single tree or something like that, that was heavy and probably made out of oak or ash or something. And they just swing those like there's nobody in 20 feet of them. Well, when they start out, they would maybe make a circle around the quarter section or maybe more, according to how many men they had on the drive. And gradually they'd work in, they'd have a fence built, a pen built in the center usually, and with openings so that the rabbits could go in maybe from two different sides, and or three, and they could close it up then when they got them all in there. They, as you came up, why the rabbits would be running in a circle, and they'd be scared, and there was, on the start, there's a lot more interest in it, because the rabbits would dodge back, and if you were quick enough, well, you'd probably hit one and bring it down right there. And as you got up closer, the rabbits would finally congregate around that pen. Most of them go in. Well, when they got them in there, they would close all the openings, and men would get inside and start clubbing them to death. Well, that was the part I didn't care much for, but some seemed to take a great delight in that. Sometimes you see people that you knew well, and you thought they were the kindest, gentlest people in the world, and they would just seem to take a great delight in that. They just went berserk. That's all there was to it. And they would forget what they were doing. They just swing that club, and you had to be very careful. Don't think I ever got in the pen but once, and that was enough for me.
Well,
I know one time there was a young boy. Oh, he was probably 10 or 12 years old. Don't remember his name. But he got hit, just knocked him cold. And I know for days, weeks after that he hadn't regained consciousness. And I don't know whether he ever recovered from it. I suppose he did, but everybody was worried about it. And I think that was the last one I went to. But they was different, and you could understand people to a certain extent acting that way, but it sure surprised you how some of them acted.
well, it was brutal, but it was necessary to get rid of the rabbits some way.
Well, yes, I don't know any other way they could get rid of that many rabbits. They could shoot them with shotguns, but money was scarce in those days. People couldn't afford to hunt them too much with a shotgun. They was too costly for what money they had. They had other places for the money, and there's almost no other way to do it.
Wasn't there some sale value on the rabbits?
Yes, often there'd be somebody there that would buy the rabbits. They would take them to, I think there's a dealer at Lincoln that would buy them, and he shipped them out, so they said, in carload lots to New York City, big cities like that, where they went to certain people, mostly foreigners, and they said that liked that rabbit, and they, of course, shipped clear across the country in an old freight car, and
Kind of gamey when they got there.
we supposed they were just buying them for the fur, you know.
Possibly we bought them back in hot dogs.
Yeah. I don't know for sure what they used it for. There was a certain sale value for them. I don't remember. You remember what the...
Wasn't there a buyer that bought them for dog food?
Yeah, that came later,
I think that was later.
In the 30s, why a dog was supposed to take care of himself.
Yeah, I forgot that.
Even the elite in the cities, I don't think spent very much on their dogs like they do now.
Well, I don't think dog food was, you never heard of it. I don't know whether they had it. Probably did in the cities, I suppose.
Okay, I'm going to encourage you now to tell me about all the coyote hunting tricks you remember.
Well,
You're just freelance. Just go right ahead and talk. Interrupt each other if you like to.
well, I'll start it on that. Of course, most of the kind of hunting as it is today, probably it's maybe as much for profit today as it ever was, but mostly it was for sport. But the real dyed-in-the-wool coyote hunter, why, he was a dog man. And a dog man was a little like a racehorse man. He had the best dogs in the world, and nobody else's dog would even compete. Of course, the real dog hunter, he got more coyotes. And then later on, why, after cars became popular, why, they found out it was a great sport to chase coyotes in cars. And Ralph and I had an uncle that could chase them anyway. He's horseback. He was a dog man too. He always had back best dogs, of course, according to him, the best in the country. He and that was Duck. Duck and Pete Kistner, they'd trade dogs back and forth. Several of them. Alan Anderson's dad and several of those fellows would trade dogs back and forth. And sometimes they would agree on which one was the best dog, but not always. But anyway, Duck, he would chase them. He would hunt them anyway. And he was pretty much a cowboy, and he chased them on horseback. And then he also had a motorcycle. And, about any way he chased them, he eventually ran into trouble. His horse fell with him one time, and he didn't wake up for a day or two after that. They found him. And then he had the same trouble with his motorcycle. He ran into one of his best dogs, and that laid him out. He finally got himself in such bad shape that when the war came along, he volunteered for service in the Army, and his shoulders were in such bad shape that they rejected him. They took him down to Kansas City and kept him around. They saw he physically wasn't able to raise his arm up high enough to salute the general, I guess. So they sent him home, and he had sold out his cattle business and everything, and he had to come back and start over again. Of course, it wasn't long till he was back chasing coyotes. But Ralph and I, our start in it was the first coyote I can remember that we chased, that we caught strictly on our own. It was probably along about 27 or so after we both out of high school. We had an old Model T we'd stripped down, driven to high school, and we took the body off of it, put a little box on it. We painted it with aluminum paint, and it was afterwards called an old white heifer. Everybody in our neighborhood knew the kepley boys and the old white heifer. Well, old white heifer, any Model T, wasn't hardly capable of catching a coyote under only ideal conditions. And our favorite hunting ground was over in the area east of where Cyphers live now, with Ralph Baby pasture. Now, they must have been about 3 sections then that was still left in grass. Of course, 27 and 28, there's still a lot of grass. And Model T would catch a coyote under good conditions, Jack, too, on grass. I remember this first occasion we had an old shepherd dog, which also had a reputation in that neighborhood, old Bingo. Well, Bingo, he got so excited, and the Model T wasn't fast enough for him, so he jumped out. And we got the coyote kind of started downhill toward the North Fork. And about the time we got pretty close to him, old Bingo jumped in front, and he ran over old Bingo, and the old Model T jumped about 2 or 3 foot in the air, and we just kept going. Ralph, or whichever one of us was handling the shotgun, got the coyote. By the time we got up there to pick him up, here was old Bingo grabbing the coyote by the throat. But Bingo knew about how to take care of himself. He never was very quick to grab the live ones. But later on, that coyote hunting got to be such a great sport for us. As a matter of fact, people criticized it and everything, but I've never known anybody that tried it that didn't get excited. about it because see a coyote ahead of you, and especially if your car will just barely outrun him, it gets to be quite a game. But later on, of course, we found out the Model T wasn't adequate to chase coyotes with. Dad kind of objected to using the family car.
I wonder why.
And it wasn't too good either, the old Ford and especially by that time, the fields were mostly plowed out, so we had a neighbor who came to Gantt County in the late 20s and was fairly prosperous, and I guess was one time a college professor, P.Z. Weaving. And he built a nice home over west of us and done pretty well until the Depression and the Rust Belt hit. And he was in bad financial shape. And he had a 28 Dodge Standard car among the other automobiles we had. Times had gotten so hard that he burned kerosene in it and finally knocked her out of it. Took it up town to Harry Joyce's and never did get it fixed. Sat out there beside the old high school building for a year or two. The kids knocked the windshield or all the glasses out of it and the headlights, tires down. And I saw that and I knew the model and everything, and I knew it had capabilities, so I propositioned PZ about trading the old white effort for that. You know, white effort was in good riding shape, so we made a trade. I worked on that, I suppose, for a month or two before I got it all put together. And from that time on, we had a cow dung car.
Did it have a name?
PZ. And everybody, we had PZ on the side of it, and everybody that in that neighborhood knew old PZ. And of course, we had a lot of funny things. Some of them could have been kind of serious happened. Old PZ. Those cars, when they came out, all the old cars had what they called a downdraft carburetor, and they just had a screen kind of over the carburetor to keep the dust and bugs out. Well, we found out in the Dust Bowl game times we had to correct that, so I engineered me a oil bath air cleaner. Put up above that. And I know one time we was chasing coyotes and we jumped in blow piles, one thing and another, and that oil bath air cleaner, which is connected to the carburetor with a piece of flexible tubing, it kind of got bent out of shape and the oil spilled over on the motor, and the old PZ started smoking it. We thought the thing was on fire. Well, we corrected that and it caught the coyote, I think. But another interesting thing, or funny thing that happened, one day, later on, one of the neighbors, Everett G. was former city marshal, another neighbor, Jess Ford, 2 or 3 of the boys drove out one day and wanted to go coyote hunting. Somewhere or other they'd acquired a big old coyote dog, big old hound. They had him in the back seat of a Model A sedan. So Virgil and I, the oldest G-boy, he got in with me, and we took old PZ and we headed for the Cimarron. Well, it was a cold day and PZ didn't have any windows except the windshield, so I outfitted Virgil a big heavy duck coat I had. Owned him my 12-gauge pump gun, and he was to be the shooter. Well, we got over there, southeast of Rapato's place on a level field. Sure enough, here, big coyote jumped out. Well, it's a good level field. Old PZ just crept right up on him, and Bird just proceeded to empty that shotgun, all 5 charges and didn't even come close. And Everett G. and his dog and the other fellows, they were quite a ways behind. They took a different tack. And the coyote, after Virgil emptied the gun, he had to reload. The coyote ran down in what we call the big draw that's east of the stout feed yard. The big draw that runs up north from the Cimarron. I kind of knew the country, so I slowed down a little bit. Everett, he kept pouring on the coals. And at the bottom of that draw, of course, there was a big gully. It was pretty well covered with grass. Everett didn't see it soon enough when he applied the brakes real something and hit that gully, and the big old hound come over on top of him and pushed Everett's nose down in the steering wheel. And fortunately, that was only damage done, but Everett carried that for a long time. And I remember the coyote went ahead and got away. But in those times, why, at least with us and the PZ, well, we probably lost 2 coyotes to every one we caught, but sometimes the ones that got away were more fun than the other. I remember another time we were hunting coyotes with PZ, and we got in the field where the Russian thistles were about 3 feet high, and we just kept plowing through them just as thick as they could stand. And finally, they piled up under the car door. The back wheels couldn't touch and give us traction. And then the exhaust pipe, we had open exhaust so it would roar, you know, and make a lot of noise. The exhaust set the thistles on fire. And I really don't know how we got out of that without working on PZ up, but one way or another we backed up, maneuvered, and we got out of that.
Had a jug of water for one thing.
What?
We had a jug of water for one thing. We poured that in there.
I don't remember.
Drove dirt. We finally got it out.
But learning to shoot a coyote from a car like that was something, and I remember this time we met out with Everett G. Everett was highly critical of Virgil's shooting ability, but really I didn't criticize him too much because he wasn't used to the gun, and he had this heavy coat on, and it took quite a bit of practice to learn to maneuver and get yourself where you could handle your gun properly, leaning out over an open door of a car. I finally got to where I was getting pretty confident about that, but about the time I was getting pretty good, I took over the driving because I scared to ride with Ralph and Ed. One time I remember I don't think we were in PZ that time, but we had an old car. We stripped down and put a box on it. And we had Ed. Ed got on us. He insisted on going hunting with us. And he was standing up behind, and Ralph and I was in the car, and Ralph was driving. And I couldn't get a chance to shoot because I was just floating around in there. I couldn't get steady enough. I was hitting the roof. And pretty soon I heard Ed pull off a shot, bang, and I looked back and the gun was pointed up in the air, and the Ed was going backwards and lit on us and panicked back behind. Well, Ralph went in, and I think we got the coyote, and we went back and picked up Ed, and he wasn't too happy about the deal.
Okay, we're about out of time. Is there anything special you'd like to finish up with, Ralph?
No, I remember the last time I went coyote hunting. That was in the 50s. And took the 2 boys along. Larry was about 14 or 15, and he was in high school. They had the agricultural class, the FFA, and they were giving prizes for all the birds and animals that they killed that were supposed to be harmful, like crows and coyotes, rabbits, and one thing and another. So points for killing coyote. And we found one right away and took out after it. That time, I had a pickup. It was a lot faster than what we had when we had it before. And come right up on the coyote. Larry was going to shoot it. Well, he'd never shot anything like that in a car. And I don't know how many times he emptied the gun, he never could hit it. We'd circle around. Had the barrel pretty well run down. I kept hollering at him, telling him how to shoot it. Finally, I just took the gun and poked out the window. The coyote was barely going along and shot it. But I never did take him coyote. That was the last time that I went.
If that reminds me, if we've got time, a few more anecdotes. When our cousin, Sunshine, we'll call him, came back from the Navy during World War II, why, he wanted a little excitement, different from what he'd had over in the South Pacific. So it was around Thanksgiving time, I took him out in the morning coyote hunting. I took my wife's car that time, and of course that was later on. We had more modern cars. And on a smooth field, I loaned Sunshine my shotgun, and we pulled right up on the coyote about 2 miles from home. As luck would have it, while he rode him just hand over appetite. Well, old Sunshine, he was pretty cocky then. So we went out that afternoon and decided to really make a go of it. And old PZ was getting a little old then, but we took old PZ and went over a little further, a mile or two further from home, and we scared the coyote out of an old buffalo wild. There was sunflowers all over the area. And this was one of those times, about this time of year, when we'd had a real cold spell, and it had thawed on top about 1.5 inches, and then it had thawed out the ground about 1.5 inches deep on top. And that, when it gets in that condition, why, it's just kind of like driving on ice a little bit. Still, we had enough traction. That coyote caught up with him a little while, and he would turn just on a dime, and I'd spin that old PZ, and it'd just spin around on that thawed ground just on a dime, and I was right on his tail again. And kept him fire another round, and he'd fire another round, and he never did hit the coyote. And finally, the coyote went down a hole, and I said, Kip, I shouldn't have said that, Sunshine. I might give this character's name away. But anyway, he went down the hole, and we finally had to pull him out of the hole. And Sunshine kind of lost a little of his confidence. But I'll never forget that time. That's the only time I ever was able to turn as fast as a coyote could. And Ed, and Vernal, and some of the others, they'd model car, and they'd set up on the edge. They wouldn't go down those sunflowers, and they'd set up and watch the show.
Anything else?
There were several other times when things happened, but I can't remember them all. I think probably the best coyote hunter that I know of in the area was Claude Pierce. And as well as I remember, there was one winter that he got over 100 coyotes. Of course, he was a dog man, and he was a trapper, a real good trapper. But we never had anything like that. We might have chased 100 coyotes one winter, but we never caught a fourth of them.
Okay, I'd like to say in closing here that Ralph married Louise Grubbs, and would you tell us the names of your children?
Yes, the oldest boy is Larry, and then Gary. Daughter is Janice, and Roger is the youngest.
Okay. Which ones of them still live here?
Pardon?
Which ones are still here?
Well, Roger and Larry live here in Ulysses.
Okay. Ray, Mary Cleo Titus, and your daughter is,
Our daughter is Sherry Ray. And she lives in Denver. And comes back every once in a while. And we go out there once in a while.
bet you do. Okay, it's been fun having you here this morning. I've enjoyed your stories. And we hope maybe we'll have a chance to continue this in another session. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.